Today, we're going to talk to you a little bit about Trinny London's journey from a startup to where we are today. So just a quick introduction of who we are. Trinny Woodhull has been in the beauty industry for at least the last 30 years. And a few years ago, came up with the idea for what is Trinny London today. And I'm Tahir Kalik, I'm the CTO.
And I'm Jay Jetley, and I'm the Chief Technical Architect.
And we're going to just start with a little bit of how Trinny London came about. Jay?
So in the beginning, Trinny used to travel a lot with her work, and she found herself putting her makeup in little pots. Lots of people said to her, this is, a really good idea. You should do this, as a professional thing. So she took the idea and applied it to how she works with the industries that she was known in, with the beauty and the clothing, and decided that the business should be about small pots that women could carry around. She wanted them to be stackable so that they were easy to carry around in handbags. She wanted her own formulas because she wanted a cream-based formula. She wanted it to be easy to apply, and she wanted the ability to be able to apply it with your finger if you were out and about and needed to reapply. And she also wanted to be able to build on her knowledge of recommendations. So being able to tell someone what colours suit them and what colours work best with them. So there was very much a requirement to build some technology around recommending these colours based on the knowledge that she'd gained over the last 30 years. So having decided on what the business should look like, she then enlisted an agency to help her build the first iteration of this and to basically get the site up and running and out there to prove the concept. This involved doing some proof of concepts around the Match to Me technology, which is our recommendation engine, using AI and machine learning, and also building the physical products, so making sure that the pots were small, that the formulas were correct, and that the pots were stackable so that you could keep your makeup together. So having enlisted the agency, they sat around, they had some discussions, they built the first few versions of Match to Me until they were happy that it was actually giving recommendations that Trinny herself would give. They then built the first iteration of the website, and there were many discussions about website versus app. But it was decided that the website was the most inclusive way of doing it, because it didn't mean people had to have mobile devices. It also meant that doing new releases was very easy. You didn't have to make sure people downloaded the latest version of the app and all the problems that gives. And also with an e-commerce site, people are much more used to buying on a website rather than through an app, and it can actually be a bit of a blocker to people buying if that's all the app does. And as we weren't using any app specific technology at the time, the website seemed the most logical way. So we built the first version of the website.
And just to give you a little bit of an idea of how it's gone since then, after we launched, we've doubled, if not tripled, in terms of orders, unique users, revenue, and even the number of people in the company. So in year one, with 6 people being full-time in the organization, to over 110, maybe over 120 today. And actually 50% of that being hired in the last 12 months, we've seen phenomenal growth in this market. So just to talk a little bit about how the first couple of years from a tech perspective went, Jay?
So year one was very much about proving that the business was a good business, that people actually did want to buy the makeup, and that people were happy with recommendations. So having launched the site, we then spent the first few months adding in all the features that didn't make the first cut of the website, and tweaking things based on user feedback. But it was very much, there were 6 of us in the team, people leaning across desks saying, we need to do this, we need to do that. And it was a very quick turnaround, but we very quickly came to realize that this was not a sustainable model as we started to grow. So we then started to look at not only the tech stack, but the decisions that have been made on third parties, and also the teams, how they were developing, and started to look for where there were pinch points, and where there were potential problems coming up in the future. And one of the things that we realized very quickly is that we were heavily reliant on Shopify, but we weren't using Shopify in the way that it was intended, and that was starting to hurt us. And it was starting to become very apparent that the business was starting to ask for features and functionality that was either impossible or very difficult to build in Shopify.
And really, then that brought us, after a couple of years of successful trading, and really, I guess, being reactive to the market, trying to prove the value of the products. By year 3, it really was, well, we feel established. We feel we have a good understanding of the customer base, looking at the growth and the projections we've had. But now, how do we become more proactive? But not just in the product, and not just in the tech, but in the business. So with 5, 6 people around the desk, everyone's doing multiple things. It's a lot easier to just get a few things off the shelf. But you also are really limited to the rate at which you can get the breadth of work out. So really the successive years were about, how do we create a very diverse marketing strategy? How do we create a market penetration strategy across the different markets? How do we diversify the product ranges? But also, how do we scale the business? And on top of that, how do we set up the architecture so we're not always having to reinvent the wheel? So, the classic way of how some startups may work is, you don't think about how you scale at all. You build, you prove your concept, and then you have to pause. You have to reintegrate, you have to rebuild whole sorts of architecture. We didn't want to get into that state. So we wanted to tackle this before it became a problem. And how do you get this idea of continuous learning and continuous build and development, and while scaling the business? So the key thing was, we didn't want to pause. So we wanted to move from 5 people in engineering to 45 in the same year, while still delivering 60 new product launches, entering new markets, and building new features. The way we tackled a lot of that was actually looking at how we split the teams and how we decide on what we build versus what we buy. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the coming slides. But one of the key things here for us was moving to a microservice architecture at the back end, so we could have multiple teams who could be distributed and work on different areas of the site without tripping over each other, and enabling us to release multiple iterations. We went from releasing once every sprint to releasing multiple times a week now. And actually looking at how different business units, so how do we stay startup while still being a more enterprise-esque organization? And the way we did that was then working closer together across departments. So although marketing grew as fast as tech did, you had direct lines with teams focusing on market penetration or new customer acquisition between tech, UX, marketing, new product development, working together as a unit. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. But this is what then led us to what's the limiting factor? How do we scale the application? And the very first real chink in the armor we tackled was moving to commerce tools, or moving to an e-com platform. Jay, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so having identified our Shopify integration as being one of the major blockers to moving the business forward, we then started to look around the marketplace. And our experience with Shopify had taught us that using a pure off-the-shelf integrated system wasn't the way to go, because it didn't give us the control that we needed. And while Shopify is great, if you're completely in Shopify, the moment you want to start doing stuff that's out of its normal bounds, it starts becoming very tricky and very difficult. So we looked around the marketplace, tried a few things, and after a small proof of concept, we landed on Commerce Tools. And what we found with Commerce Tools is being headless meant that we could be in complete control of everything that happened on the site, and this included the checkout process, which was very key to some of the things we wanted to introduce. It gave us extensibility and customization. So, we have some unusual configurations of products. So we're not just selling t-shirts that come in 4 sizes. We have stacks that are made up of other products that have lots of variants, and this can result in 500,000 plus variants for a single stack product. So we needed a flexible way to be able to deal with that. We needed something that was resilient, so it needed to be a proper SaaS platform that's cloud-based, and it needed to be fast, and needed to allow for extensibility in the forms of asynchronous processing of orders, to allow us to start sending some of the stuff offline without affecting the customer experience on the website. And basically, we needed to be able to implement some of the stuff that was on the roadmap that was going to either be very difficult or impossible to do in Shopify. And Commerce Tools ticked all the boxes for this. So we made the decision to go ahead with that and started integrating.
So the one thing to say was we launched successfully, and actually we launched without having to take anything down. So there was no downtime, there's no pausing of trading or the business. While we switched over, we did it in place of what we had in, and tried to be as non-intrusive as possible. But there were a lot of learnings, and actually this project paved the way of how we set up all successive projects. So we're looking at moving off to a whole bunch of other applications and other SaaS platforms such as ERP. And actually the learnings of how we manage this directly led to how we structure this. So what are those learnings? So one of them was, this isn't a tech platform. So one of the things some businesses may fall in the trap of saying, well, it's a backend platform, it's technology, it's all API driven. So, tech will manage it. Well, actually, the key thing about, especially a headless platform, is it's about the business buy-in. It's about how you set up the workflows. What you get with one of the benefits of a black box off-the-shelf platform is all the decisions are made for you. You just need to fit into their workflow, their journey. Whereas tools like Commerce Tools allow you to really build a business that that fits to your model. So how we set up products, to how we actually manage checkouts and customers, was different to, let's say, what was in Shopify off the shelf. And although this enabled us to do that, it meant that we needed to be far more aware of the pitfalls and the limitations of our business to make sure we implemented the processes correctly when creating them in Commerce Tools. And so with that, it truly needs a cross-departmental whole business push and kind of a tie-in or buy-in to migrating your ecom platform. One of the other things you need to actually think about is how you manage the history. So it's not just about moving forward, it's your CRM, it's how you want to actually manage customers and audit orders. So there's a lot to actually consider while migrating your finance, your ops management through to tools like Commerce Tools. One of the things that we also learned was about and Jay's going to talk a little bit more about this in a sec, about how extensible and how we would then grow the Commerce Tools platform after it was bedded in. So Jay, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yes. So one of the things that you very quickly realize when you switch to a headless system is all the things you get for free, although obviously with restrictions, on a completely off-the-shelf package. So because the data structures of things like Shopify are very fixed, it's very easy for third parties to build integrations. So you only have to look on the web to see how many integrations there are with Shopify. Whereas with something like Commerce Tools, which is very customizable and there are no real fixed data structures, it becomes much more difficult for third parties to try and build standard integrations. So it is very likely that you will have to build your own. So for instance, moving your order data to BI platform, integrating with 3PLs, logistical warehouses, those sorts of things are things that may not be apparent that you would, if you come from an off-the-shelf solution, may not be apparent that you will need to include in any project to move to a headless system. On the other hand, writing your own means that you get much greater flexibility. So for instance, with our 3PL integration in Shopify, we were very restricted on the flow that we could do between the warehouse and the ecom platform. Whereas with our own integration, we're able to integrate and converse with the system in the 3PL much better. So there are swings and roundabouts, but it does mean that you are going to have to write some code to actually to start doing these integrations.
And with that learning in mind, what does the future look like for us? Well, actually, so I touched on this earlier about teams. One of the key fundamental points we found was you cannot operate in silos, especially if you want to be a growing business, but retain what made you great as a startup. And the key thing there is creating teams that are autonomous and can make decisions for themselves and actually have room to fail and learn and iterate. So, it is fail fast, recover fast, but it's not about building just skills-based teams. So here's your classic engineering team, here's your classic marketing team. It's creating the communication lines between those areas. So you have the specialists you bring in to do what they do best, but then they are able to enable and reach out to the other teams that they need to deliver the goals, and you align the goals. So it's not about getting a tech release ready, it's about getting a product launch and whatever is required. And anyone who can wear a hat for that launch wears a hat within that team, but you enable that team. And then you create microorganisms like that across your business. Hence the idea of kind of being decentralized and distributed. But then this is the thing I mentioned earlier about kind of internal open sourcing. You don't then want to create these knowledge silos. So although we have a team of 45 engineers, you only have 3 people who understand a specific area. So this is the idea of creating a community around your code base where everyone is responsible in your engineering team for the upkeep, but you then don't just lose ownership at the same time. So then anyone who's working on a piece for a delivery has ownership of the impact of that piece. And then you have your quality control that runs across that. And then of course you have your new product development, or if it's a finance tooling or other areas of the business who are actually not just stakeholders who just see the product in the end, they're involved through the whole piece. So they actually feel empowered that what is coming out is also owned by them. So you give them the autonomy to use the tooling you create. And it's rather than what happens in lots of growing companies where problems get passed around or thrown. No, this is a tech thing. No, this is a finance thing. Rather than let's just sit down and cut the red tape and just work on it together. And that's the kind of structure we're trying to create. So it's almost management light, but empowered, very smart, very capable people. And then I mentioned buy versus build. I think this is fundamental to a scaling business, because this is where you spend your real brain power and your resource, your money, your time. And I think it's identifying your USP. You own and you build your USP, and then you look at the right partners and the right tooling around that, but that you can support it. So it's not a black box as such, but is also something that isn't a problem statement for you to solve because it's been solved by several others, like 3PL. Like we mentioned, we're now in the process of integrating an ERP, and that's again brought in by the whole business. We've taken the learning from the integration commerce tools where we have different areas of that owned by different parts of the business who owns that function. And we've looked at data owners. And so it's a distributed project again. So there's no one massive release, no one massive initiative. It's multiple different deliverables leading to that. And then Jay, do you talk a little bit about the actual architecture, both front end, back end in terms of microservices?
Yes. So having gone down the microservice route, and we're still going down that, we're now looking at implementing a micro front end architecture, and this will give the same benefits of distributed teams across the website as well, which has all the current inherent problems of being a monolith. So this will split up the site into discrete services, which means that individual teams can work on bits and can release bits of the site without affecting other things, and removes the potential for blocking releases where two teams have worked on something and there's an issue with one of the teams' works. So we're looking at decentralizing the website and allowing that to then be worked on in discrete parts.
Thank you for listening today. We jumped through quite a lot of different areas there, and we'll open up to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, actually, both of you, for staying here for a couple of Q&A questions. I'm gonna have to pick something up that you said pretty early on during a talk just now. It's the challenge of staying "quote unquote" startup while going into enterprise dimensions, something like that. Like, have you found the Holy Grail? I'm sure lots of startups would love to learn how you're going to do that.
So I don't think there ever is a Holy Grail for this, because it is so individual to how your business operates. But I think for us, I mean, there's definitely teething pains. We're still, figuring a few things out, and every year is going to be very different to the last. But we've managed to evolve both our platform, our processes, and our teams and business structure, while not having to pause on the delivery of the business. So, for example, last year we did, just on new product launches, we had 16 new product launches. We've done at least 6 or 8 already this year. And then we've also launched at least 5, if not 10 new features, some of them quite sizable or quite transformative for the business. We've entered new markets. We continue to do so this year. We've got quite a diverse plan in terms of different strands, not just in marketing and not just in products, but in approach to different markets and like in internationalization, things like that. And so far, we've not had to have what I've had or seen in a few places where you have to pause, or you have to pivot, or you have to say, we need 6 months for tech to get up to speed, or this process it's not about being inefficient, but this process no longer works. So we've not had to stop or pivot to pause the business growth in order to achieve the scaling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess it does. It's an interesting perspective. Simply, kind of, we've heard today about a couple of bigger brands, and the startup kind of growing into this, as you described it. It's just interesting thing. I got a question here. On the one hand, you said this isn't a tech platform; it's much more about business buy-in. On the other hand, building integrations is a kind of a topic that took up quite some time, etc. Like, how do you map those two sides? How do you get business buy-ins when your problems sound so techy, when everything sounds like a tech issue, really?
So language is important. So I think when you have an audience, you need to be able to understand the language that they best understand. And so like data, you need to tailor how you say and how you present at the right tone, the right pitch, the right approach. So people assimilate that information in the way they understand it. But also, actually, everything adds value. So one of the hardest things for us was trying to ascertain a value statement and a business understandable value statement to everything we do. And so you can then, rather than say, well, we're doing tech debt versus a product launch, for example, you can then actually weigh up what value does each bring, whether it's scale, costs, efficiency, market penetration, all that kind of stuff. So it's aligning on what the business's core, not just value, but the business's core strategy is. And so then there's no point doing integrations and building an application if it's not going to be used, if it's not going to move the business towards a goal that you've all agreed to. So that's how we try to start everything, with an aligned value statement.
Yeah, makes sense to me. You talked about build versus buy. But when you're going an agile path where basically every sprint can bring you new problems and also obviously new solutions, in a world that is kind of designed for fast pace and rapid development, how do you figure out in advance which pieces you think you should rather buy versus build right now before actually going into it? Kind of you have to make assumptions in advance, I assume.
Exactly. So the key thing is you do make assumptions, and actually you've got to, with Agile, you have to remember that it's not about just building everything right first time. If you throw away or you learn something in that process, that's benefit. That allows you to go to market faster. So in the build versus buy, the great thing about how the market, with SaaS platforms, like with commerce tools and things like that, is you don't need to do everything all in one go. And I think that's the key thing. It's to identify what problem you need to solve first. You need to have a vision of where you think you want to end up, but you're not trying to solve all those problems in one go and have this big bang, massive launch and release.
Yeah, good point.
So really, it's figuring out how you break it down into modules, and how you then go and solve the critical problems. And from that, you learn actually if that path is right or wrong, and proof of concept. So, you need to have different people or different teams running at different paces. So for example, for us, we've set up like an architecture and a kind of internal problem solving team or division that looks ahead, that does proof of concepts, that looks at novel ways of solving the problem. And then we have a structure that looks at actually implementing, or looks at how we can take 10% of something and fix what we're trying to do now, and then learn about the big picture. I mean, a real example for us is we're in the process of implementing an ERP system. An ERP, through its nature, it can be very big bang, covers pretty much everything a business does. So how do you dissect that, right? And that's what we've done. Sorry.
I have maybe a quick follow-up. When you can have so much out of the box, well, with the Mark technology to do so much integration, how do you resist the temptation of just going the easy way and just not, like, is it your philosophy?
So you have to understand the business. This is where you can't be siloed. You can't have tech and you can't have marketing. You can't have finance. You have to understand what your USP is. What is this business about? Yeah. What are we actually trying to achieve? What problems are you trying to solve? And that's what you own. That's what you can't buy off the shelf. That's what you have to make yours, your unique brand, your stamp on the world.
I absolutely love that point. I think we heard that a couple of times today. It's great to hear it over and over again. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here for the talk and the Q&A.